Hey, everybody! Welcome to Book Club, Red Letter Christians Book Club. And tonight we have Kat Armas, Liturgies for Resisting Empire, Seeking Community, Belonging, and Peace in a Dehumanizing World. Kat, good to see you. I'm going to give you a little official welcome in a minute, but thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and if you, I always say to folks, if you didn't do your homework, you're still very welcome. And in fact, we'll be giving books away tonight. We've got several books from the generous Brazos publisher that publishes a lot of great books and published Kat's latest book anyway, maybe the other ones too, I don't know. But so if you have a birthday today, heck, if you have a birthday this week, why don't you put your email in the Zoom and or grab Brandon there, even if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. Some of you are on all the platforms. Just tell us your email and how to get you, and we'll follow up. Don't put your address in there. We'll follow up and get you a book. So put your email in, and if you're watching the recording, sorry, but you can still get it on the Red Letter Christians website, redletterchristians.org. We started an online bookstore mostly because we didn't want to give more money to the billionaires, Kat. And so instead of
Yes,
buying it
good.
off Amazon, I mean, you can get it lots of independent bookstores, but you can also get it right off redletterchristians.org. And all the money goes to our nonprofit to support the work. And I want to just tell you a few other things. Um, we've got morning prayer and the first day of every month. And Jonathan Wilson Hargrove and I curate that prayer. We sort of facilitate it together, but it's a good excuse for us to have a friend that we get to talk with. So we'll be having Peter Story, who is incredible. Do you have a little history on the Duke world, Kat? I can't remember. Do you know Peter? He's our guest for
I
for
don't.
um, morning prayer this month. So join us in a few days. Any of you that can, we live stream that on the first day of each month. So next month, Joash Thomas, Father Joash, rocking it up in Canada, The Justice of Jesus. So you can grab this book on our website now and read it together this month. We'll have him, Joash will be with us at the end of the month. Um, Okay. I don't know why. Just maybe a featured item that will show you. Everybody needs a shirt that says,
Yes,
when Jesus
amen.
said, love your enemies, I'm pretty sure he meant we shouldn't kill them. So, and let me just tell you one other thing. Some of you all have been tracking that a bunch of us went to court this morning, and I don't want to take up much space, but I just want to say we had a powerful witness, and this connects to Kat's work, obviously. The biggest weapons contractor in the world is Lockheed Martin. There's many others, Raytheon and others, but Lockheed has its headquarters, one of its headquarters right outside of Philadelphia. And so on Good Friday, hundreds of us gathered there and we did Stations of the Cross. We remembered the suffering of Jesus and connected it to the suffering of Gaza and Iran. And we created a memorial with the names of the children, specifically the children killed, the ones who we know their names in Iran and in Gaza. The system that guided the missile into the school in Iran was a Lockheed made system, Lockheed Martin made system. Many of the F-35s, the bomb systems that are designed and used are Lockheed Martin. And so we went to trial today. And ironically, Lockheed Martin did not show up to the trial this morning. And so all of our charges were dismissed. And actually, this is really wrenching, Kat. The judge said the victim did not show up to court today, referring to the largest weapons contractor as the victim, the plaintiff, but he used the word the victim. And I actually thought of your book because I just
Yes.
finished it. Um, and the double speak and the way that we create this, and it also makes me think of the scriptures that say, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, and to refer to Lockheed as a victim, and the irony that the sadist, like the sad irony that what actually blocked the entrance to Lockheed was all of the victims' names that
Right.
have died from those weapon systems. Um,
Wow.
so anyway, we do it no matter what the consequences are, and the point's never just to get arrested, but to like not allow this to be normal. And so,
Right.
we were asked, would you do it again? I said, not only would we do it again, but we are already planning the next protest. And so, as long as they are killing folks and designing these weapons, we will continue to show up. And for many of us, wearing our faith on our sleeve and saying that we follow the Prince of Peace, and that means we resist these profiteers, as Pope Francis said, the merchants of death, or these folks that are making so much money off killing. So thank you for being here tonight, everybody. And as you settle in, it's just a gift to have Kat here. She's does all kinds of stuff. She's a writer, podcaster, won all kinds of awards, went to Vanderbilt Divinity School, but also got her best theology from her family and writes about it. You may have read her other book, Abuelita, Faith or Sacred Belonging. But this newest book has been our book of the month, and I'm so excited to talk about it together.
As am I. Thank you so much, Shane. And yeah, I'm still thinking about what you said, the whole victim thing. That is such like a thing of empire, right? To quite literally retell and rewrite and reinterpret the story. And that's how it does it. I mean, quite literally, in the book, I go back to Rome because that's the context of the New Testament, but it's still the same thing, right? Like Rome and, empire in general are the agents of chaos, the agents of violence, the agents
Mm.
of war. And yet, the way that they justify that is by, oh, well, it's just self-defense. Oh, it's just homeland security. Oh, we are just trying to save the world. We're not causing any harm. And so it's just wild how it's quite literally the same thing throughout history, generations, decades, everything. It's just yeah. Wow. It's
Yeah,
so, and thank you for the work that you were doing. And yeah, that is just to hear that is just so alarming and also not surprising.
yes. I mean, the other thing that I really appreciate about your writing is, I mean, you tell your own kind of memoir, theological memoir, your own story, and we're going to talk about that some, but you also leave a lot of room for grace for people to change. And one of the things that was most powerful about our witness this year was we had someone who worked for Lockheed Martin for more than 3 decades, more over 30 years, and has really been working hard to heal the harm that he was a really big part of, and but he has so much credibility to reach other
Mhm.
folks too, and
Right.
so he was with us this year, and we're always centering the people who are victims and their families, the folks in Gaza and Iran and Lebanon, but also to have some folks that have been a part of the machinery of death that are trying to free
Mhm.
themselves. And as you write so beautifully about, we've all been entangled in these systems of death, and we're in many ways just kind of all trying to get free together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's huge. Like we all play a role, and I know we all know that we all play a part in this, but I think more than that, it's these systems are live within us, because
Mm,
it's like fish in water. I mean, a lot of times, these things live inside of our bodies and we don't recognize it, we don't realize it. And, something I always say, as much as we're trying to dismantle the empire out there, which we should 100% be doing, I think it's also important that we're dismantling the empire in here, right? Or else we're going to
hmm
recreate the same systems that are out there, we're recreating them in smaller scales. We might, something like violence, we might say, well, I'm not violent. Violence lives out there, and it 100% does. But then also, if we pay attention, I talk about this in the book, to our language, the way that we speak, right? We bomb it, we kill it, we, shoot ourselves in the foot. I mean, we use violent language. Even when we talk about creativity, we target audiences and deploy resources. I mean, it's just our language, even our worship. I know many of us probably aren't, singing the violent worship songs that we used to, but I mean, a lot of times, even the way that we talk about liberation can be tinged in this sort of
Yeah,
language that, imperial colonial language that we don't even recognize. And so what I argue is that this isn't neutral, right? I mean, this just shows the posture, the way that we've just normalized an imperial colonial posture, not just out there, but in here, right? And that goes so
Yeah.
far beyond violence. I mean, it's hierarchy, dualism, all the things I name in the book.
Yeah, you hit the bullseye on that one, Kat.
Right.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I did, in hindsight, like coming out of some of the same evangelical culture. I mean, there's a lot that I have still really embraced. Some of it I've reclaimed, and I know that's true for you
Yeah.
too. And I mean, even like the idea of being born again, I think it's a challenge to nationalism. It's a challenge to the
Right.
borders we put on love and saying what's born of the Spirit is Spirit. Like we love as big as God loves. God so loves the world. But I do remember one of those songs I had to purge myself of, Kat. It was, did you ever do that? Oh, not. If I had a little bitty box to put my Jesus in, I'd take him out and squeeze him tight and share him with a friend. But then this is the next verse, Kat. If I had a itty bitty box to put the devil in, I'd take him out and stomp his face and put him back again. You're like, wow, and wonder why we have anger issues, and these.
Right.
But yeah, but I mean, you talk a lot about the colonization of our imagination, the imperial, and I think of, one of my friends, Ched Myers, talks about the Exodus story, which you also spend some time with. But he said, it took a few days to get out of Egypt, but they'll spend the rest of their life, even generations, trying to get Egypt out of them, to get the
Yes.
empires, even as they're going out, they're like, oh, but
Yes.
we used to have
Yes.
good soup.
Leeks and onions. Yeah.
Right.
At least in Egypt, we had leeks and onions. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's something that I always talk about because, they leave Egypt. And so when the Israelites left Egypt, what I like to think is that they had spent 40 years trying to detox, right? Not just from empire's logic, but its fears, its anxieties, right? I mean, they were just so used to the lifestyle. They were so used to a hierarchical way of recognizing leadership. I mean, a scarcity mindset, all of these things. And it was a 40-year period of what I like to say of a detoxing of empire. And then you see this even before with Moses, right? So when Moses fled Egypt, when he fled after he killed the taskmaster, I like to say that he wasn't just fleeing from Pharaoh, but he was entering a space where Pharaoh's logic could not reach him, right? The
Mm,
wilderness. And in that space, what does he become? A shepherd, where he has to learn humility, dependence, care. I mean, these are all things that Empire was not training him to learn, right? Empire does not train you to be humble, to care for people, right? To depend on one another. Like he had to, just depend on the earth. And anyway, and so it was 40 years that Moses was there, right?
mm,
And then when God calls Moses back in the burning bush and says, okay, go set the people free, what is the first thing that Moses says? I
mm,
can't. I don't have the words. It's almost like empire still etched into his mind, still etched into, again, his fears, his view of himself. I mean, it's so much more than how we might treat other people, but even how we perceive our own selves, right?
mm,
The smallness that empire etches into us, when it comes to something like, hey, I am calling you to go do a big thing, to go, help these people. I mean, I know, like you said, I'm not trying to go out and get arrested, but I mean, there's a lot that goes into this. I mean, that is a big calling, right? And there are so many things so many lies that empire can feed us when doing these sort of big things for God, right? Yeah,
yeah.
and you see it in Moses, and God's like, look, I'm gonna be with you, right? There's no judgment there. He doesn't chastise him for his fear or his uncertainty. He's just like, look, we're doing this together. And I like to say that God was patient with Moses, and so maybe we can be patient with one another, right? I love how you
Yeah.
mentioned, you're the person in the beginning that he had changed his mind, and yeah, I think that's such a big thing, that I think we owe each other a little patience. Now, I'm not saying, let people cross boundaries and, be harmful. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is that we gotta give people grace and space to change their minds, right? Because we're
Mm,
all on this journey of doing that in different ways. Yeah,
mm,
and even, kind of what you had mentioned that when I reflect on my evangelical days, there's so much that as I was decolonizing and deconstructing from so much of that theology and ideology, a part of me just wanted to throw it all away, right? And as you were mentioning, sort of reclaiming parts of it. And I had this revelation writing the book that I thought, wait a minute. I had some really profound and beautiful sacred moments in the
Mm.
midst of that, in the midst of all the, white evangelicalism, and in the midst of all of that, I had some beautifully profound moments with God. And you know what? I'm not going to let empire take that from me, right? Like I'm going
Yeah.
to reclaim, that's mine. I'm going to reclaim that. I'm not going to give that up to empire and say, oh no, take that too. No, empire's already taken enough, right? I'm going to keep those moments, even if it was, in the midst of the fog and the lights and the guitar string, I'm going to keep those moments because they're mine, right? Yeah.
So good. In fact, I want to read this little piece because it's exactly what you're saying. And this is on page 43. You said, for years, as I deconstructed the colonial Christ, I spoke of that night with skepticism. And I think you're talking about the night at
Like
Hillsong,
my
right?
salvation experience. Yeah.
Yes, maybe even a little shame, as if I had been tricked or lost myself in the moment. But now I choose to claim it. I won't let empire's manipulations silence my truth. That night, I met transcendence. I met love. I encountered the divine in a way I never had before. And you go on to share a few other places where you had those thin spaces where you kind
Yeah.
of feel God thick. And
Yeah.
even if there's a jumbotron there.
Right, right. Yeah, and for a while I was like, well, I'm gonna throw it all away because all of it was, and then, I had a revelation in the midst of all of this, and I thought, wait a minute, no, that's mine, right? And as I mentioned earlier, what Empire does is try and take your story from you, right? Try and rewrite the story, reinterpret the thing so it can justify itself. And I thought, well, no, you're not going to take that too. That was mine. Even if there was a jumbotron there, it was still mine, right?
Yeah,
So,
I've got
yeah.
this little like keepsake file that I'm actually have a lot of them. My wife might say I have a little problem with keeping things, but I have this like one piece of paper from when I worked at Willow Creek, which was what
Mm,
the
yeah,
quintessential mega church outside
right.
Chicago. But I was with the some of the young folks, a couple of them were like punk rock kids, a little wild in high school, but we had this powerful night where it felt like um just real authentic connection to God
Yeah.
and each other, vulnerability. And I wrote on a piece of paper, it's a good, good night. And I had
Mm,
flashed it to them because we were kind of sitting on opposite sides of the room. And
yeah.
it's like one of the first times I saw some of those guys like with, tears on their cheeks. And
Right.
so, but I held on to that because I thought,
Yeah.
there are plenty of bones to spit out from a
Right.
$30 million building project at Willow or whatever the stuff. I mean, now scandals that we know of with Bill Hybels and
Right.
whatnot, but like, still I've held that piece of paper because it was
Right.
real. It was,
Yeah.
and it doesn't take
Yeah.
anything away
It
from
doesn't.
from
Yeah.
that experience. So
Yeah, that's so good. And I think it's important. I think that's part of, healing is being able to hold it with one hand, the beauty, and then with the other to let go, And I think of that even as a Cuban American, right? And, in my first book, Abuelita Faith, I write about the stories of survival of my ancestors and my grandmother, right? And this faith that survived and thrived in the midst of empire. But also, with survival comes a lot of generational and colonial wounds. I mean, that
mhm.
just comes with the notion of survival, right? My grandmother, she passed recently, and she was an incredible grandmother to me, but she wasn't the best mom because she was surviving, right? She lost her husband, she was raising three kids, she was providing for her family, and so much of my journey, my healing journey, and this goes, my ethnic background, but also with my spirituality, has been with two hands, right? Holding on to the beauty of survival and the beauty of this faith and of my ancestors, and also with the other at the same time, letting go of the harm that my ancestors could not name, right? Letting
Mm,
go of the colonial and the generational wounds, the pain that they didn't work through because they didn't have the privilege to, right? That was
mm,
passed on to me. And I think so much
yeah.
of that, whether that's, your colonial wounds, your spiritual wounds, your generational wounds, right? It's being able to do both. And that's a chapter in my book, right? Dualism, being able to hold
Yes.
all the things at the same time, right? So,
Yeah. So just to pause for a second to say, I don't see anybody who has a birthday today yet, but if you do, you can put it in the chats, or even if you're watching on Facebook or whatever, just put your. We're gonna now extend that to if you have a birthday in the entire month of May here, then we'll send a few of you a free book. Let me just say one more thing. If you have some ancestry that leads back to Cuba. How about that? Because Kat's story
Amazing.
obviously connects there. So tell us a little bit about yourself if you want to, and a connection to Cuba, and we'll send you a book. Kat, you get to give away one too. You can think of how you want to do that, or if you just want to randomly select someone in a minute, you can. But back to this dualism. So I was thinking about your take on the story, often called the widow's mite, but the woman that is giving, all that she has into the church offering bucket at the uh, and that story's often spun as you say, as a you should be generous like she is and give to the church and give to missions and stuff, even if you don't have much. Um, but say a little bit more about, you kind of peel away some layers there, and I've thought of that story in a really similar way, so I think it's helpful because it's also about holding these tensions, right? That the this woman can have a really generous heart, and we can celebrate that while at the same time go, I think there's something a little more going on
Yeah.
with this story.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that the story of the widow's mite, like I said, or like you said, and like I talk about in the book, it's often used in such a way as to essentialize, romanticize the poor, as in, oh, look, or particularly her, and maybe not necessarily the poor in general, but yeah, just give everything you have, trust God. But I love that her story can be read in so many different ways, right? And one of the interpretations that I find to be so I think energizing for me because it's so such an interesting way to read it is actually that the woman is in a subversive way sort of mocking empire because at the time there was basically a fund for widows in the temple that she would have received from. So it would be basically providing for her. I mean, a measly amount, but it would still be providing for her. And so, in her giving everything she has, it's her knowing that she's going to receive it right back. And so, why is she giving everything she has? Well, if you look at sort of the context of what's happening, right? Jesus is watching her. And it's in the moment in how the temple was set up was that the rich, right, those who had much would sort of give these very elaborate, they would give in very elaborate ways, right? Throw their money so that everybody can see and so everybody would know, that they were giving all of this money. Yeah, and so in the context of the story, Jesus is watching this, right? And Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, "Hey, look at this widow." Because she kind of does the same thing. Like she gives her money the same way that the rich people would give the money, knowing that she's gonna get it right back. And so a lot of folks have looked at it as like maybe this is a sort of subversive way that this widow is quite literally just mocking empire and just saying, hey, this is how, you use your money this way and you flaunt your money this way. Well, hey, I can do it too, right?
Yeah.
And that is, throughout history and post-colonial studies, when looking at history through a post-colonial lens, you see that this is a very legitimate way that the oppressed, kind of get their power back in a lot of ways, right? By mocking empire. I mean, hey, even turning weapons, right, into things that can be used. I mean, that really is a way to take empire's sort of destructive ways and turning them on its head, right, to mock it. And I think
So good.
yeah, and so I think the widow, what I love about, if you notice, it's not just here, but in a lot of places in the Bible, and particularly a lot of times that Jesus talks, or in the New Testament when it talks about widows, they're doing a lot of really subversive things. And I think that's the point. I think the point is, hey, we look at these widows as powerless and destitute, but no, 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 no. I think they have a little bit more agency, and we're going to show you how they're doing the thing, right? How they're supposed to. I mean, even in the parable of the widow, I don't write about this in the book, but I write about it in my first book. But the parable of the widow who's consistently going after the judge, demanding justice. Well, in the Greek, the word there, or the phrase there, is that the judge is afraid that the widow is going to give her a black eye. So he
Mm.
grants the widow justice because he's afraid that she's going to beat him up. And I just love this because, again, in the context, the people listening would never think that a widow is going to beat up a judge, right?
Mm.
But the way that the story is told, again, you're kind of setting up the characters in ways that they're not usually set up to get the folks to think, right? How do we subvert here? How do we use, our creativity, our ingenuity? How do we mock the very thing that is oppressing the people, right? And so and we see that
Yes.
in the widow.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's other stories too. Like you kind of wink at them, when Jesus pulls the money out of a fish's mouth to kind of,
Yes.
especially when it's this really twisted theology that often uh, gives a blank check to Caesar by saying, well, it's give to Caesar what's Caesar's. And of course, Dorothy Day said, once we've given to God what's God's, there's not a whole lot left for
Right.
Caesar. And I think that was Jesus's point, right? Is like Caesar can
Yeah.
have his coins, like I made the
Right.
fish, I made Caesar.
Right.
Yeah. So it's
Exactly.
and there's a lot of that though, even outside of scripture. Like I can remember reading one of the historians that said when the emperor walks by, the peasant bows
Bows
and
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 farts.
farts.
That's my favorite parable.
So good. But yeah,
But yes,
that
that's
like subversive
exactly it.
imagination, right? Yeah, it's
Exactly.
so good. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, and yeah, I think some of that, we've had like periods that we've experimented with some of that. But I think of even like folks that have like bought $10 worth of stock so that they can go to the stockholder meetings and like actually have a
Right,
say
right.
against these big
Yes.
corporations. Or one time you'll like this one, Kat. I think it was Benny Hinn. It was one of the televangelists that got exposed and was just millions of dollars in private planes and all this stuff. And so we started a campaign to give them $1, and but on the dollar it said the words of Jesus, sell everything
Oh,
you have and give it to the
yeah.
poor. And then they would call us, right? The reception, they would say, thank you for your donation of $1. We'd be like, about that.
Right, right.
Could
Did
you
you?
deliver
Yeah.
a message to the televangelist for us,
Yeah.
So, but anyway,
But see, I think this is so important. Sorry to interrupt you, but
no.
Empire, as I said earlier, right? It's the same thing. It's the same tired stories, the same tired narratives. I mean, it's been the same thing throughout history. Empire has no new imagination. It is not creative, but we are, right? Like
Yeah.
we have an ability to be so creative in our resistance, right? And it can look like so many different things. Like, yes, like donating $1, and having and there was a when ice, when I mean ice is still ice, but in California, kind of in the height of everything last year, there was a group of, I mean, hundreds of people. They got in line at a Home Depot to buy 70-cent ice scrapers. I don't know if you heard of this.
Yeah.
They bought 70-cent ice scrapers and then turned right around to return it. And so they just clogged up these Home Depots because Home Depot, that particular one, or just in general, was working with ice. So they were trying to, in their own subversive, creative ways, trying to, stop them from doing that. But yes, I mean, this is what it's about. I think this is how we become people of agency and of power, right? By being creative in our resistance. And we see this throughout scripture. I mean, that is what the story of the widow's mite, I think, really shows us that she
Yeah.
is resisting empire by showing, by quite literally, like showing, hey, this is what they're doing. They're
Mm.
throwing their money like this, and this is the basically the absurdity of it, right? But yeah, I
Mm.
think that's a really important lesson. And it kind of connects to, I share up another parable in the book about the hummingbird, right? Who drops the little tiny drops of water from the stream on the great forest fire when all the other animals are all freaking out and they're saying, "Oh, this fire is so big, I can't do anything." And the little hummingbird is dropping her little drops. And then finally, when the animals ask her, "Little hummingbird, what are you doing?" She says, "I am doing what I can." And that's a story from the Quechua people. And I love that story because everything we're talking about here, these are the hummingbird drops, right? The creative, subversive ways, the marching, the voting, the going to the, and also the ridding ourselves of empire within. I mean, these are all the hummingbird drops that we're already dropping and also that we can continue to drop.
Yes. All right. I'm going to give you a little break. You can catch your breath. And all of you that are listening, like, please tell us where you're listening from. You can put questions or just an amen, hallelujah, whatever you want in the chats. We're watching it here on Zoom. By the way, if you want to join us live on Zoom, you just have to go register on the Red Letter Christians website. We've had a few like little glitches here and there. So we have a little vetting that we do to make sure everybody's a real person and whatnot. So, but put your you're calling from or joining from today, and then put a question or thought in there. I'm going to read one of the stories because so this is so lovely. The each chapter has an invocation and a reflection, a story, and then there's it really is a liturgy sort of at the end of each section. There's a closing like that. But I wanted to read this one because I have held on to this story for ages. I first heard it from I think it was Anthony DeMello, but you have this story as a there's a story about a Mexican fisherman, and so it's just a lovely story. So let's just read it and give Kat a break for just a second. A businessman is vacationing in a small coastal village when he comes across a fisherman who has just returned with his daily catch. The businessman asks the fisherman how long it took him to catch the fish, and the fisherman replies that it took him only a short while. Surprised, the businessman asks why he doesn't fish longer and catch more. And the fisherman explains that the small catch is enough to feed his family and that the rest of his day is spent relaxing, playing with his children, and enjoying life. And the businessman tells the fisherman that if he spends more time fishing, he could catch more fish, make more money, buy a bigger boat to catch even more fish, and start a fishing company. After the company grows, the fisherman could move to a big city, manage a fleet of boats, and earn millions. The fisherman asks how long this would take. The businessman estimates it might take 15 to 20 years. The fisherman then asks what he would do after all this hard work, and the businessman responds that he could retire, move to a quiet village, fish for pleasure, relax, spend time with his family, and enjoy life. And the fisherman smiles and says, "Isn't that what I'm doing right now?" Those who have ears, let them hear. So these stories are just
Good.
lovely and talk, I mean, say a little bit more about these snapshots because many of them are kind of deeply embedded indigenous or,
Mhm.
cultural stories, but they're really kind of diverse little glimpses of truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on my journey of sort of my post-colonial studies and embracing a decolonial, post-colonial way of understanding life in the Bible, one of the main things that kept coming up were these sort of parables, right? And that's because, and to me, they meant so much to me. I think it's in chapter 3 of the book where I talk about wisdom, and it meant so much to me because as someone who was raised by a culture and a family where so much wisdom comes from community and from right the body and from lived experience. You realize that that's really where so much wisdom is birthed, right? And yet empire has convinced us that wisdom is credentialed, and wisdom is learned, and wisdom comes from institutions, right? Wisdom comes from certain places. And so um, I really wanted to, as I sort of introduce each chapter, each theme of the chapter, I wanted to introduce a parable from another, culture, another context, that speaks of everything that I'm going to say, but condensed into this smart little, like, witty parable, that has been passed down from, generations to generations through word of mouth, right, through story, because so much of this, again, is story, right? How empire it tries to tries to reinterpret the story, and I'm sort of saying no, wisdom lives in so many different places among so many different people and so many different stories. And so I wanted us to sort of to recalibrate, where can we find wisdom? Where does it come? And in that chapter, I sort of asked, what is wisdom, right? And also,
Yes.
who gets to say, like, who gets to define what wisdom is, who is wise? And that's what empire has always done, right? It has labeled certain people, certain communities, as primitive, backwards, whatever, in need of, lost in the darkness, in need of salvation. And then, the Western imperial way of being is the enlightened and the wise, right? And so
Mm.
I wanted to subvert that with these parables. And also, again, so much wisdom is lived through parable. And that one in specific, in particular, that's opening the chapter on, sort of the hustle culture and sort of this gospel of ambition that empire has passed on to us, this need to just constantly expand and produce and yeah, I'll
Yeah.
stop there,
Well,
but
I
there's
want
more I
to I
can
want to
say.
talk a little bit more about that because I I mean, I've thought about it a little bit, but you do such a great job talking about uh, rest and time and how we think about, the hustle of our culture. I mean, and you point out how much Jesus naps. I mean, the brother falls asleep on the
Right.
boat. He falls asleep like there's one place in Mark that I've often really loved. I think it's the first chapter of Mark where he's doing some healing and stuff. And the disciples come in there. I was like, there's all kinds of people that need you. And he's like,
Mm,
it's time to move on. And they just move on to another
yeah.
town. And it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of this holy refusal just to like be driven by need or ambition or whatever without
Right.
any
Right.
rest. And you even track like I didn't really think about, when we got watches and clocks everywhere and
Yes.
stuff, but
That
but
is an
even
actual colonial project.
yeah, so say a little bit more about that. But then I was also even thinking, like, I don't even know if you mentioned, but like, when Lazarus, his friend, dies and he gets there in late, and he's like,
Four
and
days. Yeah.
everybody's really upset, and they're
Right.
like, and he's like, we got this. But I think of all that, and yeah, I mean that spoke to me because I'm not necessarily the best person at resting, and so
Right.
but say a little bit more about the time and the rest, and even like the beautiful pieces of scripture that you bring into it.
Yeah, well, that was a big one for me. I think just sort of the gospel of hustle, right? That we live under, that the constant need to do and be and produce. And so I was interested in, yeah, looking like where did this come from, right? Like let's trace this back. And lo and behold, I mean, quite literally, as you mentioned, the construction of watches and of a linear time. I mean, this all goes back to the colonial period. I mean, this all goes back to a specific moment in history when things began to quite literally change, and it was all tied to money, to capitalism, to production, to slavery. I mean, this was all interconnected, right? Before all of this, time was cyclical, right? And time, it wasn't something that is here now and gone tomorrow, and we're racing against it. But time is something that comes back again, right? I mean, you experience a morning every morning. The sun rises every morning, and then you experience summer, and then, fall, and then winter, and then spring, and then again summer, and right, it's cyclical. But in order to, kind of, it really started with the ships navigating across the seas. They needed linear time in order to sort of, get from one place to quite literally the other. But then that just sort of metastasized. And then you see how in the Industrial Revolution, right, when they started putting workers inside of, these. Oh my gosh, the word came out of my mind. But yeah, you started putting in factories, started putting workers in factories, and I mean, quite literally putting a clock there to time. I mean, and it is all, again, a relationship. It's not just a relationship to time, but also to our bodies, right? Um, it kind of comes, it's all intertwined into a relationship of scarcity that we have, right? I mean, all of this, I think it all matters. And so I sort of reflect on it from a spiritual standpoint of like, well, what does it mean to have this constant need to hustle and to produce and to, we never can just be. We're people who constantly do, right? And what does that mean about how we trust? You know, something that I talk about in this book and also in my last one is, obviously if you Jewish, where Jewish is Jesus's religion, right? Jewish. The Sabbath starts in the evening because the first thing that you are supposed to do is just rest. It just be. It's not just about resting. It's just about being, right? That you're not supposed to constantly try and keep up and keep up. And that's the thing, right? With empires that you're constantly trying to strive and keep up. But then it's always, what you're trying to get to is always moving. And so you're never
Mm.
gonna keep up. You're never gonna arrive. You're never gonna achieve. Because the whole point is it's supposed to keep you exhausted and anxious because that's what keeps the system going, right? It thrives on your exhaustion and your anxiety. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think
And
I
especially when you get outside of US culture, like or like out of the country and other spaces, you see, I mean, all kinds of variations of
right,
um, siestas and
exactly.
relaxing. And I mean, when I was in India, I remember there were like 100 people in line at the post office, and then like they went through some, and then they're like, "We're taking an hour tea break. Anyone's welcome to join us." You're like, "An hour, right?" Like we're tea. And then, I
Right.
mean, I can remember even when I was flying to India, we had an engine go out on the plane, and we had to
Oh my
do it like
gosh.
kind of emergency landing or whatever. And we're talking to this guy because there was some translation issues. He's talking to them in I don't know, Bengali or something. And we're like, "Do you have a sense of when we're going to get to Calcutta?" And he
Mhm.
goes,
Mhm.
"I do believe it's going to be sometime today."
Right.
And this is like
Right,
10 in the
right.
morning. So, and we did get there sometime to,
Right,
like,
someday.
and you think like in airports, like, folks here in the US are like losing their
Oh my
stuff
gosh.
over like a
Yeah,
30
yeah.
minute delay or something. But yeah,
Right.
but that like drivenness, it doesn't make us happier either. I think of
No,
that
no.
like the community, the connectedness, and you talk a lot about that, how we've lost our
Mm.
connection to
Right.
God, to each other, to creation, but the restoring of friendship. You talk about friendship
Mm.
as really sort
Yeah,
of this holy thing, but simple, but really beautiful and holy. So
yeah,
maybe say a little bit more about how to take some steps in repairing the isolating wounds that
yeah,
imperialism has done, and even like corporate capitalism kind of
yeah.
making people worth whatever they can produce, and people
Right.
become really exploited and
Hmm.
really what do you call it, the uh, just you throw stuff away,
Oh,
like
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
just get rid of people when they don't
Right.
produce, right?
Right.
Disposable
Yes.
society, right? Yeah.
Disposable. Yeah. Yeah, it's all interconnected, right? I mean, you're talking about friendship and community in one space, but it's so connected to capitalism and rugged individualism. I've been doing some research on how capitalism and Christianity sort of became intertwined in the US. I've been really interested in this. And in my
Is this a new
research,
book, Kat? Is this a new
yes, this
book?
is part of a new book that I'm writing. So yeah, it's in there. Not it's not about that, but it's in there. And so I'm tracing it back to even pre Billy Graham, and it's just so funny though because this morning I was reading about how Billy Graham and his crusades quite literally was saying, we need to return to the rugged individualism of Christ, and like verbatim, right? And I'm thinking like this is, some of the biggest evangelistic, movements. And quite literally, this is the message. Like, we need to return to the rugged individualism of Christ. And it was because at the time, the Cold War and communism, was like the enemy, right? And so everything was like anti-communism. And so we cannot in any way, shape, or form be anything close to communism, right? Like we have to be hyper capitalistic, right? And I just think I find that so fascinating because,
Mm.
all of these things are so intertwined, right? That this constant hustle, this constant individualism, right? This constant need to produce and be, and all that's doing is isolating us further, right? And as we're isolating further, it's keeping us full of despair, which again, all that does is continue to bolster up empire. And so it's this, this cyclical just thing, right? That just
Yeah.
keeps us. But yeah, so friendship, I talk about that in the book. Um, because that's something that also I've thought so much about in recent years. We focus so much on romantic relationships and we focus so much on familial relationships. But really, Jesus was all about his friends,
Hmm.
And I think, man, I don't know if I write this particularly in the book, but I've reflected on it since then. Like, friendship really is the death of empire, and I'm talking about real friendship. I'm talking about people, loving their friends the way Jesus loved his friends. And that was really convicting for me because it's so easy for me, even, especially in our sort of digital age where, I can connect with folks online and yeah, I might have my friends here and there, but a lot of my friends still live in my closest friends lived in Miami and I live, in another state. And so it's easy for me to just kind of get by, with just texting some. But then when I started to realize that, like, no, actually, real friendship is the death of empire because it is in community when we rely on one another, right? And this is where, like, I really started trying to think differently about even how to spend money, right? How to share resources. I was talking to my husband about this, and he knows how to do stuff on the computer. Like he's really good at, all that apps and stuff. And I was telling him one day, I'm like, because we stopped buying from Amazon and all the things, and so I really needed at one time, I needed like a double stroller for my kids, and I was like, I don't want to get it from Amazon, and I wish I could just put it somewhere online where I can just borrow a double stroller. So I was like, maybe we can do something with our church, like sort of like, like a Google Doc where people just say what they have and we can just be like, hey, can I borrow this for a weekend, So he kind of sits there and in like 10 minutes puts together this like website, self-hosted website of like a borrow bin where you can just like borrow,
A
and I,
borrow bin.
right. But I mention all that to say that, when you are really engaged in this sort of mindset, I mean, it can really shift how we just interact, right?
Yeah,
If I
totally.
need something, I don't have to like sit here and just order on Amazon, but I can, rely on others and they can rely on
Yeah.
me.
You would love this. We've got this thing here on the block. I mean, we've got all kinds of little things that bring people together. We've got our open fire hydrants right now on hot days. But we
Oh,
we also
amazing.
have a
Yeah.
thing called like a baby goods exchange, which
Yes.
not a baby
Yes.
exchange, but every month or so, like people bring
Right.
stuff that their kids have
Yeah.
outgrown, those double strollers, and they just trade it.
Right.
I mean, now it's exploded. There's hundreds of
Right.
folks that like we have tables that are just filling the gym, and they're kind of age groups and games or
Right.
books or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just people sharing, people bring stuff, people get stuff, but it's also to build
Right.
community. So yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
it's great that some of this is not, we don't have to overthink it. We've just got to, it's almost like we've got to exercise muscles that have atrophied a little bit, and
Exactly.
start, and
Yes.
we can
And I,
learn from
I,
so many other folks. Go ahead.
oh no,
Yeah.
no. No, I'm just thinking about what you said, we just have to rework these muscles, something that my family and I we've been really working on in the last year is embracing friction in like the small day-to-day things. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
not automating everything and, not canceling subscriptions, like doing things that would force us to be a little bit uncomfortable so that, I have to think through things before I spend money or I have to or, I was thinking about, I was in San Francisco when this book launched and I'm seeing all these Waymos everywhere. And I'm like, oh my goodness, of course, like self-driving cars is not even a thing. We don't even bat an eye at it. But really, it's to me just so wild, right? That you have self-driving cars. And I'm thinking about it, why is this a thing? Well, I think it's a thing because what Empire wants is for us to be isolated. And now we don't even have to get in a car with someone, right? Now, of course, it's not an active thing that's being thought of, but I mean, we're moving in a direction, a societal direction of, again, not having to get into a car with anyone, right? Self-checkout lines, we don't have to talk to anyone. I mean, quite literally, our society is moving more and more, to a point that we don't have to really interact with a soul if we don't want to. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's really where AI and technology is
Yo,
headed?
Kat,
And
I was
so,
at a restaurant today and there was someone's birthday and a robot
right,
thing came
exactly.
out bringing a cake and
Exactly.
saying birthday, happy birthday. I'm like,
Exactly.
no, that's not
Exactly.
it.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
not
That's
this is not the way.
right. But
Oh.
that's where we're headed. And so, kind of when I started realizing this, I was like, ooh, I need to start inviting more friction into my life. So we
Hmm.
canceled subscription services. We got a little, actually, I was just at the library today, a little used DVD player. And now we go to the library, rent our free DVDs. My daughter has learned how to, pick a DVD that she wants and take it to, to it reminds me of Blockbuster, in the 90s. It's great. But even
Yeah.
just little small practices like that. And it's it goes far beyond just the DVD thing, but how am I inviting friction so that I don't lose these things, right? I don't lose my humanity, right?
Yeah.
So I think, yeah,
And we can learn from like so many other folks who have stronger communal
right.
muscles. Like you lean
Yes,
on a lot of those. I'm
yes,
going to tell you the very brief story, and because it's the other side of this, right? That like one of the most powerful experiences I've felt from community given to us when we were in Iraq, we had a car accident, and on the way out of Iraq. we stopped in Jordan, and I mean, the beginning of the stories was these Iraqi doctors saved our lives. I mean, that was incredible. But then we got to Amman, Jordan, and they took us to the hospital. And one of my friends had a head injury, and so um, we wanted to make sure, with all this other equipment that he was all right and stuff. And so they did everything. We had like five of us injured. And so I'm telling them, I don't know how we're going to pay for this, but we're going to do our best. And I've got a credit
Right.
card. We're good for it. And then, like a half hour later, the doctors come into the room. They have a receipt for what we owe them, but they said, we want you to know the whole hospital staff is met and we are willing to cover
Gosh.
whatever of the hospital bill you don't have. And then they gave us the bill and it was itemized down to even like the x-ray screen that
Right.
was needed for the x-ray, like every single thing. And
Wow.
it was like $500 for all of us, right? And so I'm just like, I'm like, this
Yeah.
is like, I'm not in the US anymore, but also like, this is what it can look like. And then this is the last part, Kat.
Wow.
The doctor said, we were thinking you're going to fly out tomorrow and your friend's head is still bleeding a little bit. So we don't want him to get on the plane
Mm.
and it looked like, a war wound. So
Right.
what he said is, I will come to your hotel tomorrow morning and I will give him a fresh bandage. I mean, I'm getting
Right.
choked up telling the story.
I
And he
know.
said, so then he can get on the plane and not have blood
Right.
on his bandage. And he
Right.
did that. He came
Oh
to
my
our
gosh.
hotel, the doctor, and changed my friend's, head
Wow.
bandage.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's friendship. It's what community
Right.
looks like.
It's
And we've almost
exactly.
lost that, right? And
Oh,
so, anyway,
yeah.
yeah, I didn't mean to
Right.
take up too much of the story,
No,
but I think
no,
like with
that's
them reading
beautiful.
your writing, I think
Yes.
you're inviting us to like reimagine life, and and
Right.
community and connectedness
Right.
and some of
Yeah.
these efficiencies in the way that we do it. Like
Mhm.
even if you have good healthcare, which we can do a whole lot better on, like you don't always have someone holding your hand, right? Like,
Right.
and so
Right.
it's also about love. It's not just about
Yeah.
efficiency, right? So, and I think
Right.
Empire, you kind of deconstruct that so well.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So yeah,
just to
go
say one
ahead.
last thing to that, I think it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story. And I think of two things. One, he probably didn't even think like that much of it. Like it's so
Yeah.
natural that it was like, yeah, I'm just gonna go do this because why? Like, of course I'm gonna do that because I would expect someone to do it for me. Like it's just how we are, right? Not even to do it, as a tip for tab, but mostly just because that's just what we do. And then second, the second thing that I'm thinking of when it comes to it, because you use the word reimagine, and I know we talk a lot about imagination and, in these kinds of conversations. And when we talk about imagination, we tend to think of something like, I imagine when the first will be last and the lion will lay with the lamb, and I imagine a world
Mm,
where, and that's great, cool. Let's imagine that. But also, I tell people this, and sometimes I laugh because it doesn't sound very, but why don't we just like imagine smaller, right? Like, let's
mm,
just imagine smaller. And by that, I mean, like, yeah, like, what if we just like shifted our perspective a little bit enough to think, oh, you have a head injury. Like, of course, I'm going to wake up early and it's not going to be anything for me to do that because I'm a person and you are a person. And I'm going to gain so much more from making sure that you're okay to check on you than I am going to lose from me waking up to go do that, right? I mean, it's
mm,
just imagining how we can just be different in the moment to moment, day to day, hour to hour, decisions that we make that, again, invite friction. I mean, that
mm,
little thing right there, like I think that is a way that we can invite friction into our lives by, let me just like go, not, go out of my way because that sounds so self-centered, but how can I invite a little bit more love into my life today? And it's gonna be a little bit uncomfortable to do that because it's probably gonna require something of me, right? To
mm,
love someone a
mm,
little bit more. But yeah, I think, when we talk about imagination, how can we imagine smaller? And what I mean by that is, how can we, invite this sort of loving friction, however you want to call it, right? This loving friction in our moment to moment, day to day decisions that are they might be seemingly insignificant in the moment, but really they carry so much, right? Like that doctor coming to visit, coming to your hotel. For him, it was just whatever, right? But it
mm.
changed your life, right? So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Well, y'all are, I mean, this hour flew by. I got one more question for you, and then I've got a little benediction, but I want to give you the last word too, Kat. But I want to say that we haven't done, we haven't given away all of our books. So here's what you can do. If you
Oh,
have a
okay.
friend you want to give the book to, and Kat, you can also give one away, but do you have a way to do that? So if you have a friend you want to give it to, the first two people
Um,
that write an email of you can give us your email and we will get the address to send the book to. So you can gift it to two people. Kat, you got
okay.
some
Yeah.
random way you want to give one away? Okay, yeah.
You're asking me. Sorry,
Yeah,
I was a little
yeah.
bit confused.
Do you have any?
Yeah, uh, off the top of my head, I don't know. I'm like, oh,
So,
let's just um how about someone, I don't know, can I pick someone from this group
yes,
that's
just
here?
do it.
Okay.
Just do it.
Okay. How about Edith? We'll go with Edith.
Edith, you want a book? Whoop, whoop. You
I
get a
just scrolled,
car.
guys.
You
I'm
get a
sorry. I didn't
car.
mean to scroll
No, it's
past your
totally
name.
awesome. Edith, yeah, send Brandon or in the chat here, throw us your email and we will get your address from you by email. Um, okay, so this is the last. I mean, you get the last word, so you can say anything. But I thought you led us right into this because I was wanting to ask you this. Um, Obviously the kingdom of God language is subversive. It's ripped right out of the imperial lexicon. We write a lot about that in our Jesus for President book. Saying Jesus is Lord was saying Caesar is not.
Mm,
Throne, Savior. I mean, so many of these
right.
words. Even Jesus is, anti-triumphal entry into Passover on the
Hmm.
donkey, the
Yep.
cross, mirroring the coronation of the King.
Hmm.
Only this absolute exposure of imperial wickedness and torture that Christ does.
Hmm.
So I still love that paradox of using the language kingdom of God. And I know that there are variations of saying kingdom that maybe
Hmm.
offer a different way of capturing the reign of God, the dream of God. There's lots of, but
Right.
I'm guessing you're not dualistic, so you're probably going to say they all are wonderful. But do you want to
Right.
say a little bit more about why you don't like give up on the subversive imperial language of Scripture and why it's cool to think about outside of the context of patriarchy and empire too, because you kind of do that both in your book.
Yeah.
Is that too big
Well,
a
yeah.
question to end on?
No, it's a great question. I'll try and end it, in what we have like 3 or 4 minutes. Um, so I think this is a good question, and I'm glad that you mentioned the non-dualistic thing because I do think there's so much, and I'll focus particularly on the New Testament. There's so much in the New Testament that is 100% anti-imperial. Everything you mentioned, right? So much of the language, the Caesar and the Lord and the good news and the gospel, all of that. And also, at the same time, I think so much, I wouldn't say that all of the Bible or all of the New Testament is an anti-imperial manifesto. I don't think that because you still have, and I mentioned this in my book, you still have, for example, when John in the Gospel of John, John is still sort of, developing this sort of dualistic way of understanding, salvation and faith. And the reason for that is like how I said that we are fish swimming in water. I think the same thing is true for the authors of the New Testament, right? They are people trying to make sense of their existence and their reality, right? They're in the process of meaning making as we are, in the midst and under the influence of empire, right? And so I think that you're going to have, on one end, you have Paul, right? Anti-imperial, saying all of these subversive things, and then on the other end saying, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! I'm Roman, don't kill me," right? Like I'm part of this. I'm part of the empire. Don't kill me. And so I think what you see is so much of this intertwining of language, of story. I think you see just like the same thing with Jesus, right? You see Jesus, supporting women and defending women and also calling the Syrophoenician woman a dog. I mean, you see all of this intertwined. And I think what I talk about in the book that I think is so important is I think it's important to wrestle with all of it, right? Wrestle with all of it, equally. Because for us to look at the Bible and say, oh, the Bible, it's the New Testament is an anti-imperial manifesto or Jesus was a feminist. I think all that does is when we do come across verses that are hard to understand and might not sound very anti-imperial, all that's doing is, it forces us to sort of explain it away. Oh, no, 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 Jesus didn't really mean that when he called the Syrophoenician woman a dog. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But I think what's important is that, we take it all and we say, these were people trying to make sense of their reality as we are, right? And so, yeah, I think in the Bible, you're going to see so much subversive, anti-imperial language, and you're also going to see people just using the language they had, right?
Mm,
Just
mm,
using the words that they had, just trying to make sense of the life that they had, right? As we are, like so many of us were resisting in one way and then I don't know, buying from Amazon and another, I mean, there's so many ways that we're both contending, bowing our knee and standing against empire all the time. I mean, it's a constant, because again, we're fish living in water. We can't completely be out of the, sort of the reign of capitalism. So
mm.
anyways, I say all that to say that yeah, there's gonna be a lot of, reclaiming that kingdom language and saying, no, I'm gonna use it because I'm gonna reclaim it, and I'm gonna and also at the same token, there's going to be a lot of, well, I don't feel comfortable using kingdom language because of the roots and because of the context. And so I'm going to say kingdom, because that is a little bit more, anti-patriarchal and anti-imperial. I don't want to use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, right? So yeah, I think we're always as humans going to be constantly in this sort of dance, constantly in this tug of war. And I think it's worth being honest about that, right?
Mm,
Because
mm,
what I always say is that spiritual growth, right? Spiritual maturity is not about moral purity or moral perfection, because that is in and of itself an imperial ideal, right? Empire
mm.
wants you to be morally pure and morally perfect. But I think it's about integrity and it's about honesty. And I think all of us are constantly contending, with these systems in different ways. And when we're honest, when we're people of integrity, I think we can do way more in subverting and fighting against it. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question,
Woo!
but
Oh, I have more, but I love it. We'll stop. We'll call it a night. Edith said thanks for her book. Y'all have been great, folks tuning in all over the place and got a lot of fire and love on the different platforms, Kat. This is the book. You can get it anywhere good books are sold and also at redletterchristians.org if you don't already have it. And this will be our book next month, Justice of Jesus. Let me send us out with your words, the prayer of resistance. Prince of Peace, we confess the ways we have turned away from peace, the times we've chosen silence when justice called. Forgive us, O beloved, for forgetting our belonging, for thinking we are not enough, for thinking we are alone. Grant us the courage to embrace one another, to walk toward the peace that makes space for all. Let our hearts beat with the rhythm of unity, for in your peace we find our true home. We reject the violence of empire and embrace the peace of Christ. So may the peace of Christ be with all of you and with you, Kat. Thank you so much. You're a gift. Thanks, everybody, for joining Book
thank you.
Club.